It's New Year's Day 2021. It's freezing cold outside, and I'm going to talk on this instalment of Roach Reflections about going fishing for big roach in the snow. That was a very long time ago. I wouldn't even contemplate going fishing when it's sub-zero like I did 35 years ago. But the results I had were surprisingly good. The first time was 1985, around about the third week of January, around about the 20th of January. We'd had quite a bit of snow. I still lived in Wareham, and I bumped into Neil Pearson when I walked down into town. He said the roads were clear and he thought the river was in good trim, and he said he was going fishing for about 1:30 in the afternoon. So I went home, had a bit of lunch, grabbed my gear, some maggots, we only could use white maggots at that time on Wimborne waters, and I found him fishing not far below Wimborne bypass on the Wimborne side, and he'd yet to catch a fish. He hadn't been fishing very long, maybe about 10 minutes, and I tackled up with a light John Dean stick float, 5 No. 4s, size 20 hook. Started fishing with double whites on a 20, feeding a few maggots, and it was very, very cold. There was 6 inches of snow on the bank, and you have to wonder about our sanity. Owen Wentworth had come down the bank, and he was talking to Neil, leaning on the fence post, and I started fishing. Just before I started, Neil had his first fish, a roach of 1.75 pounds, cracking fish. And Owen was a bit shocked. He didn't think the roach should feed at all with it so cold. My first trot, I hooked a roach. Now, that season, the 84-85 season, although I'd caught lots and lots of 2-pound roach out of the frome, I'd never had one out of the Stour. I'd had them up to 114 back in the previous summer, around about July 84. And again 112, 113, 114 in the lead up to Christmas, but no 2s yet, not even 115s. That first roach went 2-1. Owen looked at me, I weighed it carefully, said, "Well, they shouldn't be feeding, you know." I trotted down again, another one, 2 pounds and a little bit. Just not quite 2-1, but over 2 pounds. Owen shook his head, trotted down again, another one, 2 pounds again. He said, "This is crazy," and walked off. I didn't get any more 2-pounders. We didn't fish that long that day, about 2 hours. I had 35 roach, no dace, for over 20 pounds. And by the time we packed up, which was not long after 4, the ice was forming on my old aluminium landing net handle that I still use today, and it actually stuck to my fingers when I picked it up for those last few roach, and a freezing fog was coming down on the river. We were glad to pack up and go home. The temperature at its warmest was only 1 degree above freezing, and it was soon below freezing by 4 o'clock. That time of year is about the coldest part of the year, around about the middle of January, third week of January. And it's often a time when you get snow. And 2 years later, we had exactly that again, this time a foot of snow. And remembering what had happened before, I thought, well, why not? Let's have a go. And I took maggots again, and I took a few slices of bread. And then I realised as I got to Wimborne that I had no ground bait, and I thought bread might work, even though maggots had worked before. And I went into Minster Sports, which was the only tackle shop in Wimborne. Not really a fishing shop, but they had fishing gear, and just bought a little 2-pound bag of white ground bait. And I started fishing again with double white maggots. And after half an hour, I'd had half a dozen dace, nothing any great size, 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces, say. And I thought maybe they want bread, so I mixed a bit of this ground bait up, put a 16 on and a small bread punch, and I started to catch roach, and I caught roach better than I'd had 2 years previously. Again, it was bitterly cold, overcast. I don't think there was much wind. It was easy to put a stick float through, not a great deal of flow. When it's very, very cold, a lot of the groundwater that oozes out on the upper Stour, on the sort of muddy plains, gets frozen into the soil and locked in. So the flow drops quite amazingly, really. And when it thaws, that water is released again. So often you get a rise, although there may be no rain. And again, I started to catch roach. I didn't get the 2-pounder straight away, but I had a lot of big roach, and eventually I got 2-pounders out of 48 roach this time round, which was a tremendous catch, around about 35 pounds of roach. And it was that switch to bread that made a difference. I did try maggots once or twice later, but it didn't work. They really wanted that bread. I caught a few more dace as well on the bread. I had about a dozen small dace. And it's really strange to catch in those conditions. What did happen sometimes at that time of year, if it was very, very mild and the river was low, and you tried to fish the same way with maggots and a small hook, is you got what we call bitted out. You caught tiny little dace, little tiny roach, bleak, all the stuff you didn't want. And the big roach didn't seem to want to know. It was peculiar. The cold weather just left the big roach feeding, which was very good. Like I say, I can no longer go out in that extremes of cold. It's not a good thing when you're a lot older, unfortunately. When you're young and tough, it's not so bad. There were other cold days there when the snow wasn't on the ground. There was one day in, I think, the 85 winter. I went back in February one day and fished just above that sewage outfall where the egret hangs out. Then it wasn't so overgrown with blackthorn bushes. Bitterly cold day, sub-zero all day, but the sun was shining off the river. There was a wind off my back, so I had an umbrella making a sort of sun trap. And it was so cold, the air was still sub-zero even in that sunshine, that ice built up on the top of the stick float. I caught around about 10-pounder roach, fished to just over a pound, with a few dace as well. And that day when I packed up, I thought I'd dry the net I put the fish back, because I long stopped using nets, but back then I used it. I thought I'll spread the net out to dry, and slung it out, and it just went bang as it froze absolutely solid in that icy cold air and the breeze. And to melt it, to get it back to concertina it, I had to dunk it in the river for a couple of minutes to melt it, and then I left it concertinaed and just hoped it would drain away. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Roach Reflections. Lots more to come yet. Please click like and subscribe. Slowly building the channel up nicely. And it's cheerio from me. See you again soon.